Good morning. My name is George. As a background, I have a 40 years background experience in aviation. Roughly speaking, 20 years in the industry, dealing with flight tests, including harmonization with the FAA, human factors, and roughly speaking, the same time as a European regulator. I will ask some questions to my dear panel. The first question is directed to Manuel. So no need to present you, you took the floor already. How do you see the UM market development worldwide and more specifically at Europe?
No, thank you, George. I think, well, I touched this briefly on the presentation. I think I'm going to quote a study, a report that was presented by Saudi Arabia recently, a couple of months ago, showing the roadmap that they foresee for the next few years. Okay, so and here let me remind, Saudi Arabia is a country that has many elements flying in the right direction, let's say, to move this new market forward. They have the funding, they have very new infrastructure, which makes it a bit easier to integrate this kind of solutions. There is a very strong political will to drive this innovation. So generally, there are many things going in their favor. Still, the roadmap they present, they see that it will take 2 to 3 years to put in place all the different pieces of the puzzle that I was referring before: air traffic, certification of aircraft, regulation, whatnot. Then they say the next 5 to 10 years will be heavily driven by supply, meaning that, and I refer again to what I mentioned before, there is a huge appetite. So the difficulty is, or the pressure is on manufacturers to certify and to manufacture the aircraft. If you're able in the next 15 to 20 years, if you manage to certify and manufacture something, you will have sold it already. And then after that starts a period where real competition will start, where really there will be sufficient supply, and then operators will be able to choose on the different aircraft based on the performance. So I think if we transfer this to Europe, where many of these factors are not necessarily so easily aligned, so funding is available, but it's not so abundant. There is a clear difficulty to align all the stakeholders. So it's not so easy to get. You have different actors, and everybody is playing with different legitimate points of view and priorities. We've seen an example in Paris recently of this alignment between the different actors. So I believe in Europe we will see things moving significantly slower than in other areas like Middle East.
Thank you. Next question is still for you, Manuel. What are, in your opinion, the top challenges the industry may face to ensure UM operations sustainability? I guess you reflected already on this point in your presentation. Well, perhaps you wish to highlight 1 or 2 points.
One or two points that are critical in terms of sustainability. So for me, what is fundamental is to offer the operators a positive business case. So we need to concentrate, as manufacturers, we need to concentrate on offering something that really opens up use cases that cannot be easily achievable with existing aircraft. Otherwise, it becomes just a nice gimmick, but it doesn't really. It will not turn into a real business.
Hola. The next question is for Tony Chateau. First, could you introduce yourself very briefly? And after that, the question is dealing with your experience. Chateau is an FBO and a heliport vertiport operators from UAE. what are, from an operator point of view, the arduous challenges you have faced to advance in a position new?
Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Shilton Tony. I'm from
I guess your microphone is not working. It's working?
I'm Shilton Tony from Chateau. I'm the co-founder and the CEO. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to be part of this panel to talk about the future of air mobility. I think today I'll just address the question raised from the panel to me in terms of the challenges or the difficulties that we face from an operational point of view. So from an operator's point of view, today we are a heliport. We have our own heliport infrastructure in Dubai, right besides the new Al Maktoum airport. We operate helicopters, so we're an operator ourselves. And we're also a Part 145 entity, so we carry out our own maintenance. So the idea for Chateau has been to be a one-stop shop solution in this ecospace of aviation. So from operating to having MRO expertise to having an aviation school or a training capability, this is what we're looking at as a roadmap. Now, coming down to the eVTOL side of the business or the vertiport side of the business, I think where there are multiple moving parts that we see that needs to align, and that's the key to success for this business to kickstart. So the first aspect is obviously the OEMs to be able to certify themselves to prove that they can safely operate within an environment and the acceptance of the public. The second aspect of the business that needs to fall in place is also the fact that you need enough of infrastructure to welcome these machines. And how much of that infrastructure would be ready or able to accept the number of OEM production that we're talking about. So in terms of number of eVTOLs to be deployed versus number of vertiports that need to be created, and most importantly, then how the regulator looks at piecing this whole puzzle. Also, I think there are a few other key elements to the aspect of business that we are addressing here is that we also need to take into consideration of certain critical assessments that need to be made, especially with the fact of how much of power availability or the energy availability is there out there. Because you may want to build a vertiport in a high density location, but would you have enough of energy on the grid there? Or what kind of an impact that kind of electricity would have on the existing grid? Or will the stakeholder who's in charge of providing you the energy, are they in position to give you this? So these are critical aspects of the business that we need to look at. So from our point of view, being an operator and also wearing the hat of building our own infrastructure, there are various aspects of the business that we're looking at. Of course, the training of the crew is a very, very fundamental requirement, and I think that's a challenge that we need to overcome. It is going to be a challenge when we start in terms of the kind of quality of manpower that's available, the quality of manpower that needs to be trained, and also whether it's for flying or from the engineering point of view. So I guess just to quickly sum up the challenges that we foresee is that the certification of the machines need to happen. The expansion of infrastructure also has to happen hand in hand to be able to welcome these machines to operate. At the same time, you also need to have enough of manpower or crew that are trained who can operate these machines within a safe environment at the most safe possible manner. So having said this, I think we should draw our attention to the regulators to also deep dive and look at the smaller stakeholders who are going to play a major part in terms of energy supply, in terms of transportation bodies. How are they going to align with all of this to piece this puzzle together? So I think that's how we're looking at it in terms of it. Just one thing to highlight from our point of view from Airshow and from what we're doing in the UAE right now is that we're working closely with the regulators back home in terms of coming up with a hybrid operating asset, because real estate is expensive. And if you can have a multi-purpose real estate that can welcome helicopters and eVTOLs into the same infrastructure, I don't think there's a better opportunity than that. So a hybrid option of having real estate or hybrid operations there would also be a key success model at certain locations. I would say not at all locations, but at certain locations, but would definitely enhance the whole real estate proposition of investing in the infrastructure there. Thank you.
Many thanks for this holistic vision about UAM. The third question is for Munish. So can you introduce briefly yourself? And the question for you is why UAM operations are likely to be implemented rather quickly in some countries, and why it will take longer, or we suspect it may take longer in some countries. That's an interesting question. Thank you for your answer in advance.
Thank you, George, and delighted to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, a bit about my company. I work for Eurocontrol. We are headquartered in Brussels, and we have an R&D center in south of Paris, in Bretigny, with a training center in Luxembourg and an operational center in upper area airspace in Maastricht. We're in the business of managing the flow of air traffic across the European skies to ensure that the planes flying in the air are safe, and that we maintain the demand versus capacity balance at all times. That's the business we're in. Why are we interested in eVTOL or advanced air mobility at all? We are interested because anything that creates risk for conventional aviation is of interest to us. We need to ensure that the new entrants, whether they are small drones, they're eVTOLs, and also higher airspace operations for that matter, that interact and equitably access airspace, we do that integration safely, smoothly, and equitably. That's why we're in this business. So to answer your question, thank you, George. Let me perhaps highlight to you, there are some KPIs that have been, or indicators that have been published in a report that was published by a consortium of Lufthansa Innovation Group, A2 Air, Roland Berger, as well as Unisphere from Germany. And I like the way they've set out a model. So I'd like to highlight some drivers that will help us figure out why the advanced air mobility traffic or operations will take up earlier in some places versus others. Let's take the first one. I think one of the things when we look at eVTOLs flying, we need to figure out what the terrain is like, what the ground is like. If the eVTOL is flying at a place on the ground where there are many obstacles, or is that eVTOL flying at a place where the land is fairly obstacle-free itself? Depending on that, it will impact the route it can take, the risk it carries, and therefore the role that the regulator will have to play in approving those missions. So the obstacles on the ground would be very important. The second one is, let's take a look at the airspace. How congested is the airspace where you're trying to fly these? So let's take the example of London, for that matter, where we are at the moment. Very, very congested airspace. There are 4 airports very close to each other in the same controlled airspace. There are areas that are blocked by the military. There are certain areas restricted for natural habitat that you cannot fly on, and so on and so forth. Compare that to somewhere, I don't know, north of Sweden, for example, away from any airport itself, where the restrictions are far less limited. So again, compared to the risks that appeared on the ground based on the obstacles that they're there, we need to look at the airspace and to see how many risks and how many restrictions are there itself. So ground, airspace. Then take a look at something that Tony pointed out very well a minute ago. The regulator, but not just the regulator, the relationship of the regulator with the actors. And that's something that Tony just talked about in Dubai. In Europe itself, that's close to my heart. We have many places around here where in some regional countries or national countries, the relationship is more dynamic than others. Let's just put it that way itself. Today we see in many parts of Europe where there's lack of headcount within the regulators, and there's lack of skills which need to be transferred to them. That's blocking some of the things itself. So we need to see the maturity of the regulatory authority. Then we look at to see in those cities and those areas where eVTOL or advanced air mobility is actually genuinely going to complement the existing modes of transport. If we go to, we were talking about earlier, if you look at Madrid for that matter, as it is today, the existing transportation in Madrid is quite good. It's also not that expensive. And there aren't that many heliports there either. There's only one, I believe. So to try and get an advanced air mobility business operating in that city is going to be difficult or less feasible, put it that way, economically less feasible. And compare that to some of the other areas around the world, whether it's Sao Paulo or it's in Middle East, for example, itself, where the different modes of transportation exist, but they're not that well interconnected, and therefore those places, if you take Sao Paulo for that matter, it's so congested over there, you don't need a business case. It's so clear. It's there. If you go and ask the people in Sao Paulo, or if you go and ask people in southern parts of India or in Indonesia, for that matter, it's clear to them that there is something that needs to be done to alleviate the congestion and to improve transportation. So those cities where modes of transportation are already inexpensive and easily available, the case is limited for advanced air mobility as such. So these are some of the drivers, George, that I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munish. The next question is inspired by VTOL accident statistics. I've looked to the FAA report, and the root cause of many current VTOL accidents is more on the operation domain compared to the design issues. I would like to ask Yves to reflect on European statistics and raising the question, can we proactively take advantage of VTOL accidents, the one we know, lessons learned that occurred in VFR public transport? Because don't forget, the first cases will be in VFR. And so we are coming back to all the VFR accidentology. Perhaps in the second stage we'll fly IFR, but so far the applications I've seen are in VFR. Yves, please, can you shed some light on this question?
Okay, good afternoon everybody. My name is Yves Morier. I used to work for the French DGAC, also for EASA, so to sum up, I'm just a regulator. The question is an interesting one, I would say, and I try to have a first look at it. Obviously, what I've put here is not a complete answer and would deserve more study. Also, the way I see eVTOLs will be used are likely to be a bit different also from what we have from helicopter today. So I try to limit the comparison I made about looking at commercial air transport by helicopter, which is not the only activity helicopters are doing. For that, I use two sources. One, which is the Aviation Safety Review 2024, published recently. Starting a little bit by some context, there is today 250 air operator helicopters that have an air operator certificate with roughly 7 to 8 helicopters on average. So we are speaking here of small companies. Looking at the hard numbers between 2013 and 2022, 20 fatal accidents, 51 non-fatal, 51 incident, 89 fatalities, and 22 serious injuries. So that's a sort of, I would say, numbers that we are looking at. So I went a little bit more specific and looked into a bit of data. So if you look at the operations themselves, a category of operation where you have the most accident in helicopters are helicopter emergency medical services. When you look at the phase of flight, there is quite a number, the big numbers are in cruise and also at landing. And finally, in terms of occurrence, what you find is mid-air collision, which is not always meaning a collision, but meaning something coming closer to one another, seems to be the number one in helicopters operation. Interestingly, the unknown is a second, I would say, category of occurrence, which could be, in fact, a good case to say perhaps should we have recorders on board our machines, because that could help us to know a little bit more what's happening. And the third one is about, you could say, contact with obstacles when landing. There are more others, but I would like to focus on those three. The current operation plan for aviation safety, EPAS 2024, was my second sources. And there it looks at it has a risk portfolio for every kind of activities. And for helicopters, it lists quite a number of factors of concerns. I don't say these are causes, but factors of concerns. And I would say what is certainly relevant, will be relevant for eVTOL in the future, will be issues in relation with organizations, safety cultures, procedure, training of people. And I think that exists already in the helicopters, small companies, and I would imagine that will also be in the future for eVTOL operation. There are also some particular risks that are worthwhile to be put. Of course, the weather. Weather is a big cause in general aviation, and I would imagine that perhaps more for regional air mobility, the weather will be an issue. Short distance flight, I think that can be more easily resolved, but longer distance flight, you run the risk of being caught by weather. Bird strike, that's you fly low, birds are also flying low, so you will, especially if you fly close to cities, there will be waste areas, so there will be birds. Automation is also a cause that could transpose. I would imagine that even the eVTOLs are more automated than some of the classical helicopters we see. And something which I found a little bit interesting would be, we all know that today some stupid people think it is a good idea to put a laser in the nose of the pilot, be it an helicopter or an aeroplane. And I think that could also happen, so this could be a potential cause. The last one, a bit specialized, sorry, is about for helicopters entering into the turbulence created by the rotor when you fly too slow and you fly with a high rate of descent, you enter into your own, you could say, into your own wake turbulence. That's called ring vortex. And a UK company has made a study which could also demonstrate that the phenomenon could exist for eVTOL, which would have, of course, an impact on design, an impact on training, and also an impact on the way you design, I would say, a vertiport. So again, these are very simplified and just a thinking of a regulator, non-pilot, but it would be quite useful to look into it. Perhaps I would suggest perhaps a good topic for a study for someone having a thesis. Thank you.
Thank you, Yves. It demonstrates once more again what Tony or Munish or yourself said. We need a systemic approach to safety. The safety is not only the design, the aircraft design is important, but there are all these components, operational components, which are equally, if not even more important. Still with Yves, there are currently efforts to better harmonize type certification between US and Europe. Very recently, the new boss of EASA declared its firm intention to work closely with the FAA. We know the advantages of harmonization. I myself experienced it as co-chair of the ARC Flight Harmonization Working Group, uniform safety standards, equal playing field, which is important, and reduction of administrative burden. Could you share your regulator harmonization experience and perhaps highlight the benefits of harmonizing type certificates?
Thank you, George. Well, this is a big question. It has been addressed by Manuel. We have started to discuss it in this panel. It was also addressed in the previous panel between Joby and Whisk. I think it's a very good thing, actually. Harmonizing regulation is a very good thing. In Europe, that's what we have done in the past 20 years. I still remember the time when you needed to have a 27 type certificate if you wanted to fly an aeroplane in Europe. So obviously, harmonization is a very good thing, and it's a very good news that FAA and EASA are taking the matter seriously and are trying to bring their regulation together. I imagine that this harmonization will be based on a honest discussion between the two sides, bringing their own knowledge, their own experience, their own, in order to come what is the most appropriate solution. That doesn't mean that one will adopt the other or vice versa. This can happen, of course. But there will be most probably something trying to find a middle ground between what is acceptable. That was at least the experience I had when we did that in the 90s with the FAA. We try honestly to bring things, our knowledge together, and come to a good solution that everybody could live with. That was a sort of idea, having a consensus. Perhaps you don't fully agree with it, but you know that you can live with it. And I think that's, if people approach harmonization that way, that's a reasonable way to doing it. You put a good chance to do it. So I'm certainly looking forward to the progress that will be done by FAA and EASA, and I'm confident that the colleagues will be able to do a good job. Now, there is FAA and EASA, okay, but Manuel was rightly pointing out, there are other markets around, and it would ideally, this perhaps work done by EASA and FAA could also be looked at by other regulators, or we could also, FAA and EASA could take backwards the knowledge from those regulators to create a broader harmonization. Actually, that could be the work of the International Civil Aviation Organization, which after all has been created for that kind of work. So certainly this is a positive thing, and this new that FAA and EASA are working together is a good news. To reduce the burden, there is also a tool that perhaps is not very well known, which is called the Bilateral Aviation Safety Agreement, which are agreements which exist, I would say, between the US and Europe, also Europe with China, Europe with Japan, that's Europe with Brazil, Europe with Canada. So there is, and this is a good tool because it allows, I would say, to, by having recognized that the systems are close together, by getting trust in the other regulator to, I would say, simplify validation. You may still have difference in your regulation, but you could probably say, okay, on all the other matters which we agree, I trust you. And that can be done via a bilateral, and it's important, even if we don't fully do the regulatory harmonization. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much, Yves. The last question is for Munish. We have 4 or 5 minutes left in front of us. What are the key operational safety policies and lessons learned? The lessons learned are important within the EU community that you, Eurocontrol, see essential.
Thank you, George. I'll share some of them. I think I'll focus more on the technical and operational considerations, which is where we sit. Certainly, if we're going to get the eVTOLs flying and all the advanced air mobility vehicles flying in the air in a safe and equitable manner, we need to integrate them safely in the airspace. The existing rules of the air won't be sufficient to integrate them. We will have to revise the rules of the air. Now, we can revise what exists today, or we can come up with something new. I know there are different proposals on the table, both sides of the continent. And yes, the world is bigger than Europe and United States, I agree, no doubt. And right now we're in a place where we're trying to, there's the EASA task force right now that's trying to take the existing rules of the air and to revise them to integrate the vehicles, the new eVTOLs, as well as small drones, and a new rule of the air that has been proposed, which could come up. So which way we go, we don't know just yet, but it needs to be done. We cannot live without it. Secondly, I think the technology that we have for communication, navigation, and surveillance for existing aviation, we will need to look at it because the performance requirements of these technologies will need to be revised to suit the needs of eVTOLs and small drones as such. And there are projects that are ongoing right now. There's CESAR projects as well as other R&D projects that are ongoing. And one such project where we are going to bring this whole thing together is being launched in a couple of months' time. It's called Chorus 5. We've had 2 iterations of Chorus already in the past. It is in this project that we will look at enhancing the existing concept of operation to integrate the advanced air mobility vehicles in the existing concept that we have. In Europe, particularly continental Europe, we have the concept of U-Space, which is something that is being used firstly for the small drones, but we're trying to extend it to be used for the eVTOLs. So we will be looking to integrate that and come up with a new concept of operation for that. In terms of lessons learned, where you wanted me to focus on, there are many. There's no doubt about it. In no particular order, right now, I think across Europe, when I look at it, we see a fragmented picture. It's not harmonized. Linked to the previous question, we see some areas, some regions, some cities where progress is being made and others where very little is happening. So the important thing is to look at, see why progress is being made in those areas where it is being made. What we are seeing is those areas where progress is being made is because there's a clear champion. A champion is leading that. Now, that champion, in some cases, is led or is a representative of the industry, and in other cases, the champion is a consortium that's leading it as such. But you need a champion. That's the first thing that we need. The second thing is that whilst a lot of discussion has taken place on how to produce the eVTOLs and now a lot of the vertiports and also the infrastructure, and no doubt, we believe that less discussion has taken place on understanding the demand side of it and bringing the demand and the supply together. I think that's something where we feel more needs to be done, no doubt. Then we see that where financing, someone talked about financing earlier on, and also in your previous one, Manuel, you talked about, in different picture is emerging. Tony hinted on it. That was a scene in Middle East. In Europe particularly, it's not that easy to find sources of finance. There are public entities, the European Investment Bank, the European Investment Funds, the national governments, some investors, but private investors are looking at public and state bodies to come forward so that they then have the confidence to be able to put their own money if they know that the governments are also putting the money in there as such. One of the lessons that we have learned is how you sell the case for raising finance. An eVTOL or a small drone, for that matter, is no more than a vehicle to go from A to B. So if you ask someone you need finance to create an eVTOL, or the infrastructure or the vertiport around it is one thing. But what we are seeing is that both the state investors as well as private investors are looking for something bigger. And one of the pictures, or one of the drivers that's coming out as a favorite, is investment to achieve the reduction of carbon dioxide goals, the sustainability goals, the 2050 climate KPI goals. If we link our purpose of using eVTOLs to not just producing the logistics aspects and delivering the key services or essential services, but also particularly looking at the sustainable bringing sustainable solutions, that's an area that we find in our lessons learned community that is very popular. Thank you, George.
Many thanks, Munish. I would like to conclude with a sentence raised by Albert Einstein. You cannot correct a problem using the same consciousness that created it. You have first to look at the world anew. Many thanks to all the contributors.
Thank you.